Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Babbling Irons live stream. And today we are joined by West Ham Fan Zone and Mike as well. So, West Ham Fan Zone, how you doing?
Not too bad, thanks, mate. How you doing?
Yes, good, thanks. And it's a pretty interesting live stream today, as we're going to be talking about pretty much everything since 2010 to do with the board, the ownership, just the infrastructure at West Ham, the facilities, and just completely everything. And everything that could change this summer if the board were to leave and we were to bring in new owners. And also, we're going to touch on Mark Noble as well, because he's got, a difficult role and a role I don't think he understands as well as much as West Ham fans at the moment. So, yeah, we're going to get into that shortly. And yeah, we'll take a look from what we've spent so far since 2010. So, lads, let's start with what we mentioned there is the kind of transfer spend in terms of not net spend, but like how much we've spent each transfer window, and kind of dissect where it's gone wrong, what we kind of think about the overall strategy in the transfer market that we've had, and basically just what has gone wrong and why it just hasn't worked for the current ownership, and how we could maybe improve in the future years. So, Fanzone, starting with you, as we take a look at this graphic here, which tells us, how much we've spent on transfers since 2010, and you can kind of see a breakdown of each year as well. So last summer was the most spend we've had, which was around 170 million pounds. The total spend since GSB came in is about 750 million, which is a lot of money. I was really surprised when I put this together because, the first few years we had that relegation. We also had the promotion from Championship. So, yeah, what are your kind of overall thoughts just looking at these figures and how much we've actually spent since 2010?
I think, to be honest, they have pumped a lot of money into the club, as you can see over the years, but I just think they spend it in all the wrong ways, like on the wrong areas. Like there's no real forward planning. Like there's no continuity. Do you know? Yeah, it's just it's very poor, I think, overall.
Yeah, I think it's been a real challenge just getting it right in terms of recruitment and in terms of getting in the personnel we want. And it just looks like there isn't really a clear strategy in place, and we'll get onto why that is, in the live stream shortly. But Mike, maybe one for you. What do you think in terms of the strategy when it comes to transfers? Because we've had a lot of debates around the scouting system and what we want to bring in as a club, and I guess just the wrong approach, because this is the first time, Rob Newman's come in and he's still new, but it's the first time we've really had a direction. We did have Husilios when Pellegrini was here, but other than that, it's mainly been David Sullivan who's been in control of this spending and pushing what players he wants.
Yeah, I also look at that list and I think it's some will say it's misleading, so others will say it's not. The reason why I would say it's misleading as well is because what it doesn't equate for is the summer spend and the winter spend. In some of those times where we've actually spent more, upwards towards maybe 60 million, is because we've then gone again in January when we needed to. So like the season where we bought in Souček and Bowen, that added an extra 30 million pounds onto the spend. So had those situations, or had we not been in a certain situation like a relegation battle as we was in that one, probably would have only just kind of spent about 30 million quid, so it's one of those things we seem to spend when we're in trouble. But again, the main thing is that we consistently spend poorly. Obviously that's looking at spend, but if you was then to look at what we've got, I think we've only really made one summer where we've actually turned a profit on transfers. And that was the year we cleared out all of that crap that came in the first season at the Bowling. No, sorry, first season at the London Stadium, not the Bowling. And that's when, we went and spent all that money. I think with the second year, get my facts right there. I think the second year we made that profit because we went and sold all of the dross that we bought in. But because we brought in so many on like a free, because we went quantity over quality, it was easy. We just kind of brought those players back and sold them off and got money for them. And it again, we're just always selling in players for terrible money. And to Zone's point, we're spending it in the wrong areas. You know, up until our Spine Emerson, the most money was spent on a fullback is Masuaku. That's not to say you always have to spend massive money. It's just a simple matter of you need to ensure that you're spending the right money in which to do it.
Yeah, I guess to touch on that, Fanzone, you know, looking at this summer that's just gone by, you know, our biggest spend, as we show it here, 170 million. What do you think about that? And, you know, there were a lot of names that were mentioned throughout the summer, and it looked like, oh, we're going after this profile, but then we would turn our attention to a completely different profile in the same position. So have you got any thoughts on that? And, you know, the type of people we were linked to, and maybe just your overall thoughts on what the plan actually is?
Yeah, I mean, the main example of that would be the chase for a centre midfielder. I mean, it was said, like before the end of last season, it was said that we were going for a centre midfielder. We desperately want a centre midfielder to upgrade on Thomas Souček. And over the podcasts that ex-WHO employee does every week, you sort of take a few names and you listen to the players that we were going after. So the obvious one and the main target was meant to be James Ward-Prowse. And then what was he quoted at? 70 million or whatever it was. And we thought, no, we can't touch that. And then we go for Onana, who went to Everton. We're also linked with John McGinn, Flynn Downs, and they're just all completely different players. There's no looking at one certain type of player and going for the best one. It's just a complete scattergun approach to everything.
Yeah, it does seem like there was kind of a conflict between what we were trying to do in terms of like the actual scouting side and what maybe Rob Newman was potentially putting his input into him. You know, like the likes of Zielinski, I remember being linked with us, that kind of type of person. But then, like you mentioned, someone like John McGinn would be linked, and it was very strange because you can clearly see that there's a David Moyes input there. Now we want a manager input for sure. We want that as you know, not just as fans, but like as a club, you would want your manager to have some sort of input into what kind of player he wants. But if you're getting recommended a certain type of player, you have to trust in your team that is what works for you. And I think that's where our biggest issue has been over the years, is that there's been no consistency between the manager and the owner or the director of football, whoever's been in charge. And we've actually seen quite a big discontent between the few people that are in charge there. So I guess another one for you, Fanzone, is what kind of spending would you want to see? Like, say it gets to next summer, is there, right, we just need this position, we should focus on that? Or do you think it should be, right, well, we've identified this type of player that would be a good asset for your team, let's go after that?
I think it all comes down to the quality of your scouting. If you have a good scouting system, then things are made a lot easier. I think, like, for example, look at, like, I said it in the last video where I joined you guys, but Brighton are the prime example. Like, they just do everything like brilliantly. Me personally, I would look at I would bulk out the scouting system, and I would look at 5 certain players, for example, all similar types, and then just see who would be the best fit, sort of thing. And the issue that I have with the way we do it at the moment is another thing I've picked up from X's podcast is we have a long list of players that we go for, and we look for the best deal rather than the best player.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. I think with what we've got right now is such uncertainty around West Ham. I think that's the big word that most people are probably associating with us right now, is uncertainty, whether that be survival in the Premier League, a transfer structure, a transfer policy, and just completely everything to do with the club, like down to the T, is just, it seems to be up in limbo. And, Mark Noble coming in as sporting director, as we'll touch on shortly. But again, it's another one where fans were like, right, this is a good appointment. We've got someone like Mark Noble in and around the club. But what is he actually doing? And it's actually come out himself and said, I don't know my role yet. Like, I still have a lot to learn. I still have a lot to be doing. So Mike, what do you think about the overall process in terms of just from top to bottom? What would you say is the biggest issue right now in terms of, is it money? Is it money spent on particular players? Is it the infrastructure? Is it, you know, the overall hierarchy? What would you kind of pin it down to at the moment?
Culture. Essentially, it sounds really corny, but every company in effect will have a mission statement, right? West Ham try to do that with their 9-step pledge. The truth of the matter is we don't have a culture at the club that says this is who we are as a football club and as a brand. This is who we are as a football team in terms of the style we want to play. These are the profiles of players that we want to go for. It's just a hodgepodge. Now, what's enforced that is the fact that when you have a manager who comes in and makes a declaration of, I really admire the Red Bull model, that instantly gets fans excited and says that I want to look and adapt and adopt that. Now, Premier League is such a strong and powerful league. Going for a Red Bull model is difficult unless you have significant money where you can kind of go take the true cream of the crop of young talent. But if you do it the right way, it can work. But the fact is, the culture at the club is wrong. It's about sidling yourselves up with a star player. Every season, there seems to want to be a marquee. There's always been a perpetual point as to say, but every season we've broken our transfer record.
I mean, DPN. Sorry, Mike. Just to interject, DPN says it perfectly here. You know, the strategy is talk to a favoured agent. You know, that player seems good, but then we just lowball bid it and kind of insult them, and then we just move on to the next target.
But exactly, that's what I mean. It's a cultural problem. It's people that have been in the game for so long, they don't have different voices telling them what it needs to be or how it needs to be. And those people who, if they do come in, are quickly moved on. They're not, then their advice is not acknowledged. It's not taken on board. And in over nearly 30 years of football, they haven't learned. They haven't learned how to be successful. They're successful in other business, but they're not been successful in football. Other than getting promoted, that is it.
Yeah, I think at the moment, like going back to this, one thing we can say is they did back David Moyes this summer. You know, spending 170 million is a lot of money, regardless of what club it is, and especially for us, you know, trying to push on into Europe. This is what fans wanted. We wanted to spend a decent amount of money, but again, it did seem like there were still some issues, and we highlighted it. You know, we said, despite we've improved on this, there's still a lot of other improvement and overdue improvement on the squad. So it kind of then counters out. But in terms of, you know, not just transfers and not just spending money on players, there's also been a big issue with West Ham in terms of our facilities and our infrastructure at the club, because, you know, Rush Green, as many people have said, is one of the worst training grounds to go to, and it is not Premier League level. And, you know, we take a look at some of the statistics here. So there was a study from Kieran Maguire that kind of pointed this out from 2010 to 2021, that West Ham had the third lowest investment in infrastructure in the Premier League. So again, that is a pretty damning statement in terms of how much we've actually put in. And, you know, you can see here, 31 million spent since 2010 on infrastructure. You'd think, okay, that's a reasonable amount. Well, actually, when you break it down, 50% of that was just upfront cost for moving stadium. So it wasn't actually, you know, invested in the facilities per se. So yeah, around 10 million was actually spent on improving Rush Green. And to be honest, where on earth has that 10 million gone? Because I'm not seeing nothing to do with 10 million.
I think that 10 million is actually split across in a development of Rush Green, the purchase, and also the improvement of Chadwell Heath. Chadwell Heath had £4 million plugged into it. I believe actually it's only 6 million that's gone into Rush Green. 2 million of that was around the purchase, and then £2 million in upgrades. I think we maybe spent an additional 1 million when Pellegrini came in because he made some things, but I do not believe it's 10 million that's been spent. But if you take by contrast, Liverpool has spent, I believe, around 65 to 75 million. Obviously, it's Liverpool. Leicester have spent 100 million. Bournemouth, because they got relegated, they shelved it, but they had 40 to 50 million pounds going into new facilities. QPR have new facilities being made, which are around 30 odd million pounds, and that's QPR. Look at the likes of Burnley, their training ground in comparison to our training ground, which is 2 porta cabins, and the recent development at Rush Green for the women's team was the development of another porta cabin. This is a Premier League football club operating out of high-end porta cabins, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, Fanzo, what do you make of that? I mean, it's just it seems like for a team that's moved to London Stadium, and a lot of the costs would have decreased for what we're actually paying with the stadium right now. Why on earth have we not spent more money in improving our infrastructure and trying to develop into a more competitive team? If you look at West Ham as a player, and you see the new players that come and turn up to that, Rush Green or Chadwell Heath or wherever it be, I imagine the look on their faces. I would pay to see the look on their faces when they see it for the first time, just what a state it's in.
It's quite shocking, really, isn't it? I mean, I've drove past Rush Green on the way to work myself, and I think, bloody hell, this is a Premier League football club, and this is it. Like, it's terrible. Yeah, as you say about the players coming to see it for the first time, you wonder why so many players reportedly reject us. But yeah, I mean, going back to all them clubs that you said a minute ago, I'm sure I might be wrong, so please correct me if I am. But I'm sure didn't Fleetwood Town put a lot of money into their training ground, or am I wrong on that?
Most likely, to be honest.
Yeah,
Wouldn't be surprised.
Sure, but yeah, it probably is the fact. There's probably a lot of clubs that have spent more than us on the infrastructure. To be honest,
it's just shocking. It's just like when it comes to transfers and stuff, it's like, oh, we spend this amount of money and that amount of money, and it's like we want to act like, or seem to be acting like the big boys in that sense. But all the little things like improving the training ground, we can't be bothered with that. As long as it looks good to the fans, say the Lucas Paqueta thing. Like if we bid 50 million for him or whatever, that looks good in the owner's eyes. But improving all the little things off the pitch, we seem to lack in that department massively.
I think the problem is it's an intangible. There is no quantifiable way in which they can state that if I spend X amount on the training facilities, so for instance, if I was to spend 40 million pounds on training facilities, which means that we then only have a 20 million pound budget, that this is going to improve the team long term. So their argument is, and the argument accepted by fans, is that we as a football club need to put money into the transfer market, but we also put money into that poorly. And we don't then question, well, how do we improve our smartness in the transfer market? Basically, Leicester utilised not only obviously winning the Premier League, which obviously was an anomaly based on how things happen over time, but they've used a smart scouting system to bring in quality players to sell them on for huge budgets, and they've utilised that money and revenue earned from player acquisition and sales to not only fund their team, but to then ensure that they have money from other avenues in which to pump back into a new stadium project, which is going to be a whole complex they're going to do, to invest £100 million into a training facility. They actually have an aqua area, an area where players can do hydrotherapy. West Ham have to send their players to a local swimming pool. We don't have things like hydrotherapy at our ground.
We're probably just getting a wheelie bin filled with ice or something.
No, exactly. But like Swansea, for instance, they've not been in the Premier League for a long time, but their training facilities, in the period that we've been with Gold, Sullivan and Brady, obviously Gold has now gone, obviously, but during that period, a team such as Swansea, who never had the same financial backing as West Ham, now I know the argument would be we've had crippling debts. That was also heightened by the fact that they were taking a percentage on said debts. And essentially, they had new training facilities. Within that, they had hydrotherapy and all of those kind of essentially simple things that you would expect for an elite league football club to have. Not saying that we're an elite club, but saying we're in an elite league. And therefore, there are a certain level of or certain standard that every club in that should be pushing for. And we simply aren't. Also, sorry, another one that's done improvements is Tottenham. They improved their whole entire training ground and also paid a lot of money to do so. So clubs are doing it. We are the ones that are not doing it, and we kind of accepted it as fans.
I think with David Sullivan especially is very much an ego thing. So like even DPN mentions here, like the training ground isn't in the press, so the owners, you're not going to be interested in doing anything that isn't on show. And we all know David Sullivan loves that kind of marquee signing that he refers to each summer, and all these big names that get thrown out for agents and whatnot. So I think if we were to say there was an opportunity to move to a different training facility that was the best in the Europe or best in the country, he would be absolutely all over that, because A, it would just be something brilliant to brag about, which he loves, loves to brag about the small wins, and B, it would be not something that we'd have to develop internally. So like you mentioned, Mike, there's no, intrinsic, there's no like tangible value to what we would do when we invest in the training ground facilities, because like you mentioned, there's nothing you can measure it on other than, maybe over time with less injuries or whatever. And I'm sure that plays a part with all the injuries we have, just because of the training facilities we have, and also just the staff we have in general. So yeah, I think there's a lot we could probably talk about with the facilities, but let's move on to the setup with the staff and how everything works at West Ham, because it is strange. It is very strange how we've operated since 2010 and how much David Sullivan, and predominantly David Sullivan, has had control of a lot of stuff. So we can kind of look at the current staff we have right now. So on the board, we have Sullivan, Brady, and obviously Kretinsky as an investor. And then we've got Rob Newman, who is the director of football, and Mark Noble, who is the sporting director. And then on the coaching staff, obviously you've got Moyes and his assistants, likes of Mark Warburton that was brought in this summer as well as an attacking coach. And then you look at the scouting, we've got Alan Irvine and, again, Rob Newman doing that role, who also is director of football. So there isn't really a clear structure here. There isn't like we have a scouting team here, we have an analytics team here. We're going to, combine the two. We're going to have set people working on set projects. It isn't really like that. It's very much, okay, Rob Newman's come in to kind of give us a little bit of direction. But before he was here, what was the actual structure here? Because it was pretty much Moyes working with Sullivan on transfers and how everything's set up, and they had pretty much full control. Now, it's good that they do have an element of control, but on the flip side, it just looks like a total mess, and it looks like we just don't have a system in place that is going to allow us to be successful for year upon year upon year in terms of development. So yeah, Fanzone, one for you. What do you make of just the overall setup as we bring it back up here in terms of the current staff?
I think it's very poor. It's just my issue with the current setup. It's the Rob Newman and Mark Noble. They're meant to work together, and they're sort of meant to be like above David Moyes as in Rob Newman's role as director of football is meant to be above David Moyes, but it seems like everyone works for David Moyes.
To be fair to Rob Newman, he's not director of football. He's our head of scouting and head of recruitment, so he's not even a director of football.
Right. It's just okay, fair enough. But do you see what I mean? It does seem like David Moyes is like in charge of everything, and it's like even like the prime example I've got of that is like Rob Newman. Like he, the whole interview that come out with, is it the Diary of a CEO, whatever? That do you remember that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he brought up the whole Alvarez thing. It's just like he doesn't trust. It feels like he doesn't trust his scouts, sort of thing. And it's like everything has to go through David Moyes, and I think it's really poor, to be honest. It's just I think we sort of need a whole like restructure of how things are done, because I think Rob Newman also needs to be a bit more. I think he needs a bit of help, because it seems like he does it all by himself, which is an issue.
Yeah, I mean, he was brought in to kind of fill that void and maybe bring a bit of structure to what we're doing in terms of transfers, in terms of, maybe putting a bit more input into who we should recruit and providing some stuff to Moyes in terms of, the personnel we could go for. And he has got a track record of being pretty successful in that kind of area. So it looked like we were kind of trying this summer, and then it's just kind of again taken a backtrack. And the introduction of Mark Noble as sporting director again is a strange one to me. It was kind of like, okay, how can we fit Noble into this current setup? Now he's retired. Okay, let's give him this role of sporting director. Okay, brilliant. Now what is he actually going to do? I think that's the main issue, is what is he actually bringing right now in terms of, actual input? Because yes, he'll be around the squad. Yes, he'll be looking at like the likes of under 18s, under 16s, and working closely with the players. So yeah, I mean, we do have Rob Newman, as Mike mentioned there. He is predominantly the head of recruitment rather than director of football. So I guess it then paints the question is, what kind of structure could we have? Because this could be a potential for what we could see in the future. And in this scenario, we wouldn't have that manager owner dictatorship at the club. It would very much be, okay, you've got the owners in charge. They're going to have someone like a director of football who is going to operate and oversee most of the stuff. We're going to have a scouting system in one place. We're going to have an analytics team who's going to use actual data to push players through and work with a scouting system in terms of doing that. And then you have the manager at the bottom who can then speak to all of these different departments and get inputs and, provide his own input as well. But it shouldn't be that David Moyes says, I want X, 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 X player, and we have to then go and try and do it. It should be, okay, he's got a system in place of people he works with and trusts to do that for him. They should be able to do that side of the role.
Yeah, the way I see it is you have your owner, you have a technical director, you arguably have a sporting director and a director of football. Those are your bridge between the essentially the football side, and then you have your operational side, right? So your technical director is managing essentially the club day to day and managing that kind of aspect. So this is around about dealing with things around your brand, kind of helping to bring in players and that kind of thing. They're one of those bridges. You have obviously your sporting director is essentially, as Mark Noble's kind of alluded to, in helping that pathway. So again, helping to set the culture in the club around how we work from a sporting operations side. Okay, so the technical director is more about the day-to-day operations of the business. Sporting director around the actual sporting aspects of the club and culture and so on, and works hand in hand with a football director of football. So the director of football then has underneath him an analytics team. He has a scouting team. He has a chief scout in there that looks after those scouts. Now, in fairness to us, we do also have Grant Holt and I can't remember his first name, but Santos, who are two of our scouts that we brought in during the summer. But again, we need to have a team, two separate teams, and we've only got brought in just an analyst recently. I think we brought him in from QPR. So again, we're trying to build out this structure, but there's a point where the manager is so involved that in actual fact, it then makes a problem for these other people, because essentially what you end up having, rather than having effectively a analytics team, so you have a subjective and an objective team in your scouting, we don't. We've only just brought in an objective eye in an analyst. We've always had it, essentially, it's been objective. And we're relying on the objective views of David Moyes.
It's been the eye test, hasn't it, really? It's been the eye test to Moyes.
And which are traditionally only is very comfortable with players that he has at least watched himself 2 to 3 times.
Yeah.
So the reason why he looks at the likes of Broja, Lingard, and so on, these players, is because he's watched them up close. Therefore, he is comfortable with that player going, I think I can get something out of him. Now, what it doesn't do is review based on your own team, starting to look at benchmarking. So looking at analytics from a point where you look at your own team and then start to go, well, what outputs am I getting out of my team now? So if I'm going to bring in a player, I need a player that meets their benchmark or exceeds it. And if they exceed that, great. Now I need to benchmark that player against the Premier League or the top 5 leagues in Europe. And then maybe you then look at the elite clubs. If you're looking to break into that elite, you then go, I need to benchmark my players against the top 6.
Yeah.
And I need to find a player that I think is attainable, but arguably is a player that is hitting levels that a top 6 player does.
Yeah.
And then from there, you use your data, then bring in that pool. You can then pass that on to essentially your subjective part, which is your scouting team, to then go and give the eye test, to again give a review. You then bring together the data and the player kind of clips and information from the, that kind of going to the games and watching, or the video analytics.
Yeah.
Bring them together, and then you present them to the manager saying, right, based on this player, or this is the kind of players that we need, or based on the metrics within our own team, this player plays in the same way, but he's also exceeding here, here, and here, and this is what they can bring. If we're looking to improve in this position, this is the player based on analytics and scouting that best support it. That is not what we're doing. We did that this summer. We looked at players. Lo and behold, who was one of the players West Ham went for? We used data.
Just to clarify, we mean Babylon Irons, not West Ham.
We utilised data based on a essentially benchmarking against the West Ham squad and benchmarking against the top 6 teams, and then obviously the Premier League. And one of the players that we put in there was Onana. Funny enough, West Ham went for him. There's a couple of other players in that list that we've also been linked with over the course of this season, and even in the summer, players that we had on our list, like even Rutter, who's gone to Leeds. Again, it's looking at players who are performing elsewhere and in positions you need and saying, what are they doing against our players and so on. We're not doing that. It's essentially a manager who's currently sitting there going, I like this player, and this player. But that's fine. But then there needs to be a committee in which goes, okay, but how does that then work? Even Guardiola, who's one of the best managers in the world, even says he'll talk to his director of football, and he doesn't really give names for players. He says, this is the type of profile I want in a player. Go find me that. If he likes a particular player, he will call them out. But ultimately, he gives his scouting team a profile and says, go find me it. Yeah. And then it's about, I will coach that player. That is his mindset. That's completely different to Moyes. Moyes is that I am the manager, I am hands-on, and I manage. Yeah. Ultimately, if you want to work with a multifaceted team or a multidisciplined team, you have to have that team mentality where each team has an input, and as a group, you come to a decision. And this is why you have to segment a manager away from that transfer piece, that maybe even the playing style, because you need to have those guys that are in a technical director, sporting director, and director of football role, as well as your scouting and analytics team, that are not beholden to that manager. Like Pellegrini went, the whole staff went. Newman came in because he got a green light from Moyes. Moyes shouldn't be green lighting that.
Yeah.
If he's the director of football, is transfer market is saying, obviously, I know the club had identified him as the head of recruitment and so on. The truth of the matter is, he should be above Moyes and detached from him. He works with him and in kind of interlinked. But ultimately, if he's a director of football, he stays at West Ham even when the manager goes, because his role is then to go and find the next manager, not manager goes, you go, son. That's not how you utilize that role. And this is the problem why you said about Noble not understanding his roles, because the club doesn't understand the role. It has no concept on how to operate as a modern functioning football club. And it's kind of benchmarked, say, Red Bull. Look at Monaco. They went and got the director of football from Red Bull, which was Paul Mitchell, into Monaco. Toulouse is a great example, who are also using analytics and a director of football to got themselves out of Ligue 2 into Ligue 1, and they're doing well. It's
we can even look, closer to home, looking at the likes of, Brentford, who have completely developed based on, expected stats, and a lot of the stuff they do is around analytics. So, yeah, as E20's own TV mentions here, it's good to have you back on the stream, mate, as well. Sully is the root of the problem with most stuff. So, Fanzone, what do you kind of make of it? Teams like Brentford, teams like Brighton, who have very much that kind of structure that we're trying to suggest here in place. And, they are using data and analysis to drive their decisions rather than, say, an eye test of someone like David Moyes, who is then putting forward players that he prefers just based off what he's seen. And the way the world is moving, we are moving so much more towards data and analytics. Do you think that is pretty much a necessity for us moving forwards?
I think so, yeah. I mean, if, as you say, you go back to Brighton and Brentford as the examples. I mean, when Brighton let Potter go to Chelsea, they already knew who they wanted. Like, it's De Zerbi, isn't it?
Yeah.
That they already knew who they wanted, and then you see yesterday on TalkSport that the top Italian clubs are already looking at taking De Zerbi back to Italy.
Yeah.
The thing with Brighton will already have 5 people lined up to know who they want next. That's because it's forward planning. They know what they want because they've got the right people in place. With us, with David Sullivan, it's like we're stuck 20 years behind everyone else, and that's the big problem. Because this is why all the uncertainty around David Moyes. This is why we're looking at people like Rafa Benitez, because Sullivan still thinks it's 2004, and it's a big issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, a lack of, like you mentioned, it's just a lack of structure and a lack of identifying what we need. So if we, the big question mark about Moyes being sacked is, well, actually, I don't think the owners have one clue who they would want to bring in, other than Benitez, who's available and is, ready to go. There isn't really a plan. Like you mentioned with Brighton, they were losing Potter, and their kind of people came out in an interview straight after and said, don't worry about that. We had a plan. We've identified De Zerbi. We've identified a style of play already. And, as Mick is saying here, it is, we all love West Ham. We all want us to succeed. And it's hard to see, I'm not going to say those words, but certain people in the club, trying to change or not trying to change, lacking change at the club. And yeah, as I was mentioning there, so Brighton, have that in place where okay, we lost Potter, we're going to go get De Zerbi, and we've got a manager to replace him and him, so they've already got that in their mind. With us, it's going to be reactive. It's going to be a reaction to something happening. It's not a plan. Moyes was brought in to stay up. That was it. He's completely exceeded everyone's expectations in that 2-year period. We've got comfortable with him. They've said, okay, we're going to back you this summer. So fair play. You have to hold your hands up. This summer, they have spent a lot of money. It hasn't worked. November was the time to identify that and give themselves a proper chance of bringing in a better manager who would have progressed us. We didn't do that. We held on to him and said, you're going to get 3 games after Christmas to turn it around. We got 1 point from Arsenal, Brentford and Leeds. That was enough to keep his job. It was like, okay, then we're going to move on to Brentford in the FA Cup and then Everton in the league. Okay, we beat Everton. Phew, relax. Let's give him another few games. There isn't a plan in place here. It's kind of go, come as you go. And again, we've mentioned, even when it comes to transfers, scattergun approach. And, you will hear that word so much around West Ham. There is not a plan. And just the overall structure of the club, like we've mentioned here, is just a mess, and it needs to be sorted out. And it could potentially be sorted out this summer. But before we move on to kind of the summary, one person we have spoke about is Mark Noble, and his role at the club right now as sporting director. He's come out and said himself in interviews on podcasts, he's still learning the role. He still doesn't fully understand what this role entails. It's still very much a development for him. From what he's kind of said, it's very much he's hands-on with the youngsters and taking a look at the youngsters around, and maybe going to the likes of the French league to take a look at some players. So again, even his role seems a bit scattergun. Even his role seems a bit like, okay, I'm going to do a bit of this, bit of that, just start to learn more things, which is totally fair enough. But if we want to be a proper Premier League club with a structure in place, is that really the best way to do it? What do you guys think on Noble's role and how we're kind of trying to integrate him into the club?
The way I look at it, if they wanted him to learn on the job or wanted him to gain experience across all the levels of the club before really having a go, he should have been doing what they did with Jack Sullivan, having work in each department at the football club. The fact of the matter is, I believe Noble was told one thing about what his role would be and what it would encompass.
Yeah.
And then the reality was that once he agreed and took that, the goalposts were moved. And they were moved 20 yards down the pitch and hidden behind a wall. And not only was it hidden behind the wall, it then had a no entry sign on it. So how I see it is that some of what Noble said is right and good in that he is, because he's still of a good, fit enough level, that he is working with the players at a first team level all the way down to essentially assess and review the qualities of each age group, essentially.
Yeah.
So he can start to then go, well, I need to cherry pick. So we made the comment, there's comments obviously made about when we let go of Longelo, we let go of Alessi and things like that. Now, it's all really disappointing, and some of those players maybe should have had a go in terms of like Alessi, but if he's doing, as he says, training with those players, he's then starting to go, I need to create a pathway for this player to get into this age group, and then for that player from that age group to get up to here, up to then it gets to the Premier League team, the First League. Now, that's why you could say like Longelo was good, because you're looking at Ollie Charles. Now, all of this is well and good, but then he needs to have not a player-manager relationship that he had with Moyes. He needs to have a very cold, hard-faced managerial one to Moyes. He is now managing Moyes.
Do you think that's pretty much impossible to do, given the history of playing under a manager as captain, and now you completely flip it and, actually now I'm in charge of you?
Noble always talks about, I like Moyes because Moyes has a pair of bollocks on him. Well, Mark Noble apparently has a pair of bollocks on him, and he's a grown-ass man. If he can't turn around to David Moyes and say to him, look, I'm the sporting director, and my vision for the club over the next 5 years is this. I need you to get on board, and this is what I need to see you implement. If he can't do that, he's not fit for the job.
Yeah.
So it's as simple as that. There's no ifs, buts, maybes. Oh, it's mine, but no. Your role at the club now is to put the club above everything. You are detached from your playing past. Your playing past is now an irrelevance. It's all down to you now managing each level of the club from a playing side, because that's what it kind of seems to be. Not really, it seems to be doing some scouting, but again, that's in which to help the scouting team say, I believe this player fits the mold of this club and the personality of players. That's why he's being utilised for that, because he knows those players and he knows the type of players they are. Hence that moment where there was the Liverpool game where David Moyes turned around to Noble and said, who should I put on? He looked into the eyes of Fornals and said, you need to bring on Pablo. It's that type of thing. And that's why, again, he needs that kind of be that guy who goes and talks to the likes of Areola, Fornals, Lanzini, who are clearly upset at the moment, and go clearing the air with them, and then going to the manager saying, right, this is not on. Either you play them, or if you're not going to play them, you tell me so I can start selling them. That has to be the way he works. He has to start putting pressure on Moyes and making demands of Moyes. He is Moyes' manager. It's not he's working with him. No, he is your subordinate now. You need to act like that. You're no longer captain of his football club or his first team. You are now the captain of the ship, essentially. You now need to be that captain. And that means you have to, if you need to be overbearing on David Moyes. And if Moyes can't handle that and doesn't want to get on board with Moyes, Noble's 5-year plan, the only person who moves there is Moyes, not Noble. And then Noble finds someone who will enact his 5-year plan and essentially bring about what it is. Sorry, Zone, I know I cut over you there, mate, but just jump in, sorry.
No, it's right. I was just going to say, I think with Noble, obviously he is well respected by everyone at the club. But I think maybe with Moyes, the reason he doesn't want to do things like that is maybe because he has this overriding need to feel liked by everyone, and he doesn't want to upset people. That may be a way to look at it. I don't know. I'm just speculating.
Again, would you not believe that if that's his attitude, that he wants to be liked by everyone, then he's not doing his job?
Yeah,
with a manager who is liked by everyone. It's like you have to sometimes be that person who turns around to someone who is even overachieving and just go, you know what, mate? The last few weeks or so, it's not on. It's not right. You need to sort this out. Or even if you've cocked up once, it's it's not good enough, you need to improve. And that's what Noble has to be doing to Moyes. Is we keep hearing about pressure, but what pressure? He knows he's not going to get sacked just yet.
Yeah.
And, it's just, again, like as I say, that if Noble is looking at these the youth systems and trying to create pathways, which of those youth players are going to get a chance? Like Mubamba has been killing it for the youth team, had an injury crisis to our strikers, and he's been scoring at under 18, under 19 level. He's not even getting chances on the bench. We used to reward players. Now we have 9 subs and we've had injuries. We used to reward those players by bringing them, training them with the first team, which he has been doing, but then give them 20 to 15 minutes in a game, then upping it to 30, maybe 45, and then maybe they get a start. But we don't see that. And for those who keep going, you're just training, I tell you what, how did Phil Foden do with those 20-minute cameos that he kept getting for Man City when people were asking him to play more games? It improved him so much more. And Noble's own words were, a player needs to play. So you play them or you lose them. And that's what we're going to see. Unless we play the likes of Mbamba and give them the pathway, we're going to lose them. So there needs to be pressure on the manager, which to be essentially more welcoming and more open to giving them more minutes. But again, as we've said before, sorry guys, I know I'm ranting a bit, but as we said before, when you look at even the likes of Fornals, Lanzini, Areola, they're almost in effect frozen out of the club out of their first 11, regardless of form of others. So if these seasoned players who were performing brilliantly for us last year can't get in the squad, what is the chance for even a player that is on the cusp of having a chance to prove their worth? Not all of them will be worth it, 100%. 90% will foul, probably even more than that. But at least if you give that 10% a go, some of them will earn you money like Grady Dean Garner did. That's, by the way, that is not at all, as some people say, a failure. It wasn't. It's a player who's about to be released who then got us £12 million. So it wasn't a failure. It was a good move in the end. That's the type of things you need to do. You need to give these players a chance, ultimately, to then earn their next move, which means we earn more money to reinvest either into training facilities, into the youth facilities, or to buy new youth players. That's how you work, how you grow. That's how you become sustainable. But we're not sustainable in any way because nothing we do has any true structure. And something we mentioned about the last football game, there is no accountability. And a fish rots from the head down. That is what it is.
Yeah, I think this video has shown like how pretty much every aspect of the club needs improving, and everything kind of interlinks into one, because it's easy to say, okay, our policy in transfers has been the reason why we failed. But then you break it down. We've actually tried spending money. Is it that issue? Okay, you look at the facilities. You then think, okay, look at all the injuries we've had and all the development that's been halted. And you then talk about Mark Noble and then the role of the under 18s and under 21s, 23s trying to get first team football. So it all kind of interlinks, and it's all very uncertain and just bizarre. I think that's the easiest way to sum up, the structure of West Ham is just bizarre. And the fact that it's gone on for the last 13 years is crazy. That is a long, long time and I'm really surprised we've been able to sustain it and be as, successful as we have been in the Premier League, finishing, most seasons mid-table-ish. I would say that's actually pretty much a success for us, considering how we've actually operated as a club. And, it's only till recently we've been trying to implement change. Again, the era of Pellegrini was another one we thought was maybe heading towards a change of direction, but again, failed. And it comes back to the point of we should have a structure in place and it shouldn't be dictated by managers. And I think that is the biggest issue we have right now is we have a football club that is dictated by not only the manager, but the owner, who really likes to have control. We have two people there that love control of things. And David Moyes is never going to change that. I don't think he would want what we're trying to suggest. I don't think he would want a scouting team. I don't think he would want all this analysis. I think he prefers the eye test. I think he prefers players like Lingard, where he knows in his head he can trust that player to perform and he likes him. And it's like, okay, he's looked at players like James Maddison and thought, actually, he's not for me. Alvarez of Man City's thought, okay, that's not for me. You know what? So in my opinion, that's fair enough. Like, if you think at that time they're not good enough, then that's your opinion. But it just kind of strengthens the view that he shouldn't be doing that job. You know, he's not a scout. He's not good enough to identify that talent. And there will be a lot of talent that goes missed and opportunities that will go missed if Moyes just consistently has control. And the alternative is agent pushes from David Sullivan. So I think we need a completely different structure. I think this summer is going to be absolutely massive for this football club if we do survive. And I think, you know, all the signs are pointing towards a change of ownership. I think this is the summer we will see a different ownership, and especially if we stay in the Premier League, because they'll be able to sell for what they probably want to sell for. And it's a great opportunity for someone to come in, and we're seeing it so much more now. The likes of Newcastle, Manchester United, another one being rumoured with more of a takeover from that kind of region of the world. So it's going to be very interesting. Fanzone, let me just get your summarising thoughts on just everything we've discussed and what you kind of hope to see moving forwards.
I just want to continue on from what you just said then about like the future of the club.
Yeah,
there is no doubt that we like, obviously we have a joke and say like, oh, West Ham are massive and stuff like that, but we genuinely are, in my opinion, like a sleeping giant. All we need is a change of ownership and to get the right things in the right places. And I think the future could look so bright for us because we've got, on paper, you look at our squad, we have a brilliant squad. Yeah. And then we have, despite what people think of it, the stadium, when you look at it from the outside, it is a, do you know what I mean? For potential investors, that is something that you would want to get your hands on.
It's an attraction, isn't it? It's I think with West Ham, what we also have is a very, very growing and core fan base of fans that will support the club. And again, you could look at other clubs that are kind of sitting on the edge of maybe trying to push into that European spot and, you know, bridge the gap between the top six, you'd say, the traditional top six. I think Newcastle, again, was another one that was such an enticing project for someone like Saudi Arabia to come into, was because the location that they want to build around, the infrastructure, and also the fan base. They know they're gonna be able to build out that fan base, and they have that core support already. And I think we have that in, you know, also in our location with Stratford. You know, there is a lot of surrounding in Stratford that could be developed and could be improved on. And, you know, you look at like the training facilities, that's another one where it could be instantly improved. And again, you mentioned the stadium. Who's to say an owner might come in and completely redevelop that stadium and you know, the surrounding area. So I think in terms of London, that plays into our hands massively. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think we are kind of a sleeping giant. It just depends on who we can maybe entice and whether David Sullivan will be able to let the club go to a buyer that we need and a buyer that we probably want as fans. So yeah, I think it's so tough to call what's going to happen because our future is really uncertain at the moment in the Premier League. And I think that is the main point right now, is we do need to survive. Otherwise it could ruin a lot of these potential plans for the summer. And yeah, as we've mentioned with the managerial stuff, completely needs to change in terms of the structure of analysis and transfers and recruitment and just everything to do with West Ham. And yeah, let's get your final thoughts before we end this, before, you know, the Champions League's on and the big teams are playing.
Yeah, so my final thought, I just want to touch on, you mentioned about a couple of players that we could have gone for and we didn't because the manager said no. This is again where we talk about that committee piece, where you start to then talk about understanding and referring to potential and then stating, well, this player maybe isn't a player now, but it might be the player for next season. So we'll buy him now while they're cheap for next season. We can keep them on loan at their current club, or you bring them in and you develop them over the course of this year, and then you have them ready for next year. That level of foresight is not there. As I say, that the club from top to bottom is a hodgepodge of ideas. It's taken what are trends in around and just inserted in with no plan. It's to make it look like it is functioning. There was always something that I remember, and I can't remember who wrote it, so I apologize. But the problem is we as fans have an aspiration and a want for this football club. What the problem is that our aspirations, our dreams, and our wants don't necessarily align with those that own the football club.
Yeah.
Those that own the football club really have only ever truly been concerned with being a Premier League club. If that essentially keeping your head just above water and not drowning has always been their modus operandi. It just has been. And now they're in the end game. We're seeing money and decisions start to dry up. If you felt much more kind of clammed up on certain things. Yes, leaks are still coming out, but if you look at the last 2 leaks that came out, it was clearly to see where the camps are. David Moyes is safe, outpouring of outrage on social media. There'll be other parts of social media that isn't. Then there is one release that we're going to get rid of David Moyes and we're looking at other managers. Much more positive. It's, again, they feed the market. They prey on our love for the club and essentially play on our rage, on our anxiety, on our passion for this football club. And they use that in which to inform their decisions rather than having the foresight, the plan, and the conviction to make their own decisions, rightly or wrongly. And this is part of the problem. If we want to be an elite football club, you look and you talk to elite football clubs and you follow those models. You maybe go and try and grab 1 or 2 of their people. You maybe can't grab a Paul Mitchell, but maybe you go and grab a really well-respected, say, scout at Monaco to bring him in to then give him a role of a director of football or a chief scout. You do those kind of operations. Now, people go, well, we can't do that. We went and took Paul Newman from Manchester City. He was put on gardening leave because he accepted a role at us. So it's not that we can't go and take these staff from big clubs, because Newman came from Manchester City while still there. So it's about looking at structures of other clubs and saying, well, if that structure is working and we want to implement that structure, fine. Let's go and speak to the higher ups. Let's try and maybe take 1 or 2 of their staff or people they recommend from other clubs that know that can do that, and then start to implement it slowly and build it out properly and effectively. The problem is building these things out. It's like a startup company. You pump a hell of a lot of money in and you're losing money in the process, because whilst you're getting that all up to speed, they're not essentially driving revenue. You're not increasing revenue. You're not bringing in money. But once you start to get those operations working, you start to see things like much more successful transfers. Those transfers then translate into you selling players on for more money as well. And then you go and buy the next level player. This is the thing that we haven't grasped. We keep thinking you go buy a big player for big money, that increases the team. When opposed to, if you are smart, you are clever, you make the names. Sometimes it's about making that name or taking that player who's on the cusp of being one and making that name rather than trying to go and buy them into your football club. It becomes almost a false economy. And that's basically West Ham. Yeah. We've worked in a false economy for years under the custodianship, because let's face it, they don't want to be called owners. Custodianship, because it sounds nicer, because then they don't have ownership of us from West Ham. They are custodians. It's just shit marketing. That's all they've tried throughout the years. It's just shit marketing, and just that is it. It's all smoke and mirrors. As soon as you scratch under the surface, it's like a rusty nail. That's basically what it is. Just a false economy with smoke and mirrors, and that is West Ham for the last 13 years. And some of the stuff I've said as to how we need to be structurally is how professional clubs are. And that's, if we want to move forward, we need to start doing that. And we need to start looking at the more kind of intangible things, such as the facilities and so on, as to essentially improving our own self-worth. We don't have essentially self-care of West Ham. There is none.
Well, let's just wrap this up anyway. Fanzone, what are your kind of final thoughts on what we've discussed, and is there anything you'd hope to see change in the near future for West Ham?
No, it's just pretty much as I said before, just as everything that we spoke about, just get the right people appointed in place, have a proper structure to the club. Yeah, and as like just to finish on what Mike said, to be a proper club, if we want to, if like we say, we have this phrase that West Ham are massive and stuff like that, as I said earlier, but if we want to be a big club, we need to start acting like one.
Yeah,
I
definitely agree with that, and I think everything we've mentioned here again ties into one thing, and that is just the current setup of West Ham and how it does need to change, because it's now been 13 years of these owners, so this cannot and will not be sustainable. We've flirted with relegation so many times. We've looked at different managers here and there, and it's pretty much been it's just been a roller coaster of the last 13 years, really. We've had relegation, we've had promotion, we've had a couple of seasons where we have pushed for Europe and got into Europe recently, and it felt like the London Stadium move, they were trying to advocate as a reason to develop, and we haven't really seen that, other than we did get Europe twice, so it's hard to kind of say, well, no, we didn't, but quotes of we're going to be playing Champions League football in 5 years. You'd expect to see a different approach to what we're doing in terms of our setup, and it's been the same. So yeah, I mean, this has been a pretty good video. So yeah, thanks for coming on, Fanzone, and we'll definitely have you on in the future for any future ideas that you have. And yeah, you have to take all the credit for this video because this was your work, and we're just here to discuss, really. So yeah, if you guys want to check him out on Twitter, I'm sure you already know who he is, but yeah, you can see it at the bottom of the screen there, scrolling across. That's his Twitter handle. Myself and Mike's are on the screen as well. And if you're still at this point in the video, please do leave a like and also subscribe to the channel. We're pushing close to 400 subscribers now, which is absolutely amazing. And yeah, we're pushing a lot of content out, and we're just going to keep going, man. We're just going to keep going with it, and hopefully the tide will turn with West Ham, and one day we'll be sat here with smiles on our faces, talking about the good times and how we're playing on a Wednesday night in front of 60,000 fans against someone like RB Leipzig in the Champions League. So, lads, we can dream of that one day. There has to be changes made, and hopefully there will be. And yeah, I guess until the next one, there is only one thing left for us to say, and that is
Come on, you Irons.
Come on, you Irons.